Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. The Arizona frontier, late 1870s. A strip of dry land stretching for miles under a pale, cloudless sky. The sun hits the sand hard enough to bleach color out of everything, grass, boards, and skin alike. The air is dry enough to crack lips and split timber. Out here, nothing moves fast. The world has slowed down to the rhythm of the wind and the scrape of boots against dirt. Elias Boone rides through the remains of what used to be a proud ranch. His father's ranch, before the war and the drought, took it apart piece by piece. The fences stand crooked, half buried in sand. A few cows linger in the shade of dead cottonwoods, ribs showing, too tired to kick at flies. The well pump groans when he works it, coughing up water that smells faintly of metal. It's enough to keep him and the animals alive, but not much more. He's a man in his mid-30s, lean from habit rather than hunger, with hands built for work and scars that don't tell their full stories. His left shoulder bears a faded cavalry tattoo, the mark of men who once rode under orders, crossing Apache lands with rifles ready. Elias never talks about those years. There's a look in his eyes, steady, quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of stillness that comes from guilt that has learned how to live inside a man without breaking him completely. Since the war ended, he has stayed where others left. He doesn't owe anyone, doesn't trust anyone much either. His purpose now is simple: keep the land alive long enough to matter again. That means fixing the fences, clearing the spring, tending the cattle that haven't died off yet. Most nights he eats beans by lantern light and listens to coyotes. He hasn't spoken to another person in weeks, and that suits him fine. But lately, there's been something different about the land. Signs of movement. Footprints near the spring, faint smoke from a distant ridge, the faint echo of children's voices carried by the wind. Elias knows that part of the ridge, an old Apache hunting ground, taken by settlers decades ago and fenced without thought. He figures the people who've returned are not looking for a fight. They're looking to survive. And though he's a man who's been trained to see trespass and threat, he doesn't feel either. What he feels, standing over those tracks, is unease mixed with curiosity. He crouches near the edge of the spring and touches one of the prints. Barefoot, small, a woman's or a child's. The edges haven't blown over yet, meaning they were here this morning. He looks toward the ridge, nothing but heat shimmer and silence. His hand drifts toward his revolver, out of habit, but he doesn't draw it. Instead, he stands there and thinks it through. If they're Apaches, they'll be desperate. Water is scarce, and every rancher within 50 miles guards his well with a rifle. If they come here again, he can drive them off, or he can let them drink. Both choices carry weight. One keeps him safe. The other keeps his conscience intact. He's not sure which he wants more. That night, he lies awake in the small cabin he built with his own hands. Walls patched with mud and pine, roof that leaks when it rains. The wind moves through the cracks, carrying the smell of the spring and something else. Smoke, faint and woodsy, from a fire not his own. He stares at the ceiling, thinking about the faces of people he once saw through rifle sights. Women and children running when the cavalry rode through the canyons. He tells himself he was just following orders. But the memories don't care. They come anyway, like dust under a door you can't seal. By dawn, he's already up, working the corral. His horse, a worn bay with one white eye, paws at the dirt impatiently. Elias pats its neck, calming it down. His gaze keeps drifting toward the ridge. He knows they're watching him now, maybe waiting to see what kind of man he is. Miles away, hidden among the rocks, Naira kneels beside a small fire. She's 28, sharp-featured and steady-eyed, with skin darkened by the sun and hair braided tight with turquoise beads. Around her are 4 women and a child, survivors of scattered Apache bands driven south after raids and relocation orders. They've returned north not out of defiance, but necessity. Their food is almost gone, and the only reliable spring and reach lies on land, now marked by white fences. Naira's people look to her for decisions, but she has no clear path. She knows the man who owns that ranch, a white man living alone, might shoot on sight. but she's seen him from a distance, quiet, slow-moving, not like the others. He doesn't patrol with a rifle or set dogs loose. That might mean something, or it might mean he's waiting for them to make a mistake. When dawn rises, she sends 2 women to scout the spring. She stays behind, watching the horizon from under a rock ledge. Her heart beats tight with tension, but she doesn't show it. She has seen enough death to know fear can't lead her people. Survival must. Down below, Elias moves toward the spring again, same quiet pace, same line in his jaw. He knows what he's walking toward now. His mind runs through choices: speak or stay silent, defend or allow. As the wind picks up and the light hits the rocks just right, he sees a figure at the top of the ridge. A woman standing still, watching. She doesn't hide. Neither does he. 2 people, separated by history and fence posts, now watching each other from across the same patch of water and dust. Both wounded by what this land has taken. Both unsure whether this meeting will end in peace or blood. For Elias Boone and Naira, this is where it begins, on dry ground, beneath an empty sky, between survival and memory. The next morning rises sharp and dry, a pale strip of light stretching over the ridge as the wind rattles the half-broken fence posts and sends loose hay tumbling across the yard. Elias Boone is already outside before the sun clears the line of hills, his coffee still warm in a tin mug as he stands by the spring house. The night hadn't been easy. He'd woken more than once to every sound that didn't belong. The faint clink of stone, the creak of brush under a light step, the whisper of women's voices carried just far enough of the mind to wonder if it imagined them. He doesn't move for a long time. His instincts, the kind that never truly left him after the cavalry years, are telling him to secure the perimeter, check the rifle, make sure no one is near the barn. But another thought presses back against it. If they wanted trouble, he'd have it by now. The spring sits quiet, only the steady drip of water and the soft hum of insects. The earth near the bank shows faint depressions from bare feet, maybe 5 or 6 pairs, small and light. He looks closer this time. The prints are pointed inward toward the water, not away. That detail tells him everything. These people came to take water, not to scout and attack. Still, his hand tightens slightly around the mug. Old habits die slower than memory. He breathes through the tension, deciding again, he'll let them come. He won't warn them off. If they take more than water, he'll act. But he wants to see who they are first. By mid-morning, the sound of movement returns. The creak of leather, the muffled rustle of skirts against dry grass. Elias stays where he is, resting one hand against the pump handle, as 6 Apache women appear at the edge of the trees. They walk in a line, cautious but not frightened. No men among them. That alone makes him ease slightly. At the front is Naira, the same figure he saw on the ridge yesterday. She steps forward slowly, her chin lifted, shoulders squared, as if she's walking into an argument she already expects to lose. Behind her, an older woman with gray streaks in her braids carries 2 empty water gourds. A young girl trails at the rear, eyes darting from a spring to the cowboy's boots. Elias doesn't speak first. His face is unreadable, calm, but his heartbeat is steady in his chest, heavy like a drum under his ribs. The women pause several yards away. He senses the weight of their eyes on the tattoo on his shoulder, the mark that still makes him feel like a man wearing a crime. Naira studies him carefully. She sees a man weathered by work, his hat low, his hands scarred from rope burns, not from drink or violence. He looks like someone who wants to be left alone, but not someone who kills for sport. Her people have crossed too many ranches to mistake the difference. "You live here," she says finally, her voice low but firm. Elias nods once. "Since before the drought." She glances at the pump and the buckets by the post. "The spring is old," she says. "Before this fence, my mother's people drank here." He answers slowly. "Then they knew where the water runs best." A faint muscle moves in her jaw, uncertain if he's mocking her or not. The older woman beside her shifts her weight, whispering something quick in Apache. Naira shakes her head and steps closer to the spring. Elias steps back half a pace, not enough to look afraid, just enough to clear the way. The women approach and fill their gourds. The rhythm of the water against clay is the only sound between them. The young girl kneels to wash her hands and gasps quietly at the cold. Elias watches the moment, realizing how long it's been since anyone that young touched this water. He should say something about the fence line, the cattle, the law, but the words stay in his throat. Instead, he picks up a loose plank from the ground and starts repairing a corner post. It's not a show of power or indifference, just something to keep his hands busy while they finish. When Naira's done, she straightens and looks at him again. "You will not tell the others in town?" she asks. He meets her eyes. "There's no reason I should." Her gaze lingers. She doesn't thank him, but he doesn't expect her to. Her people have no reason to trust any white man's mercy, and he knows it. Still, something shifts in the air, an understanding, small but clear. As they leave, Elias notices one woman limping slightly, her ankle wrapped in cloth. He almost says, "Wait," almost offers to fix a proper bandage, but he stops himself. Help from him could look like a trap. He lets him go. After they disappear into the brush, he crouches beside the spring, scooping a handful of water. The reflection staring back at him looks older than he feels. Eyes too tired, too full of what's already been done. He wonders what the town would say if they knew he let raiders drink from his spring. Probably that he's gone soft. Maybe they'd stop trading with him. But that doesn't bother him much. What bothers him is the faint memory of the girl's small hands in the water, the sound she made, half wonder, half disbelief. It's been years since he's heard a sound that pure. That night, as dusk folds over the land, Elias lights a single lantern in the cabin. He sits by the window, watching the ridge. The silence feels heavier now, filled with what's unspoken. He keeps thinking of Naira, her steady gaze, the scar on her arm, the way she carried herself like someone who'd been forced to lead long before she was ready. He knows what she's doing isn't just survival. It's reclamation. That's dangerous. The settlers in town wouldn't understand that kind of act. They'd see it as provocation. Elias runs a hand down his face and exhales, already sensing what's coming. The next time they cross paths, it won't be as quiet. And yet, deep down, he feels something stir, a quiet instinct telling him he's done the right thing. For the first time in months, he doesn't feel completely alone on this land. And that, somehow, makes the silence between him and the ridge feel less like emptiness and more like the beginning of something that neither of them fully understands yet. By the third day, the air turns heavier, carrying that dry static smell that comes before a dust storm. The horizon has that sickly yellow haze that never means rain, just wind, dirt, and trouble. Elias Boone feels it in his bones before he even sees it. Years of scouting have taught him how the desert warns before it strikes. He watches the edge of the ridge, eyes narrowed, as the cattle start shifting nervously and the wind hits in short, uneven bursts. He had expected the Apache women might return for more water. What he didn't expect was the uneasy feeling in his gut, something that has nothing to do with fear, but with anticipation. He's not used to waiting on people, and he doesn't like not knowing what they plan next. The last 2 mornings have been quiet. Too quiet. He wonders if they moved on, or if they're watching him from the rocks, deciding whether he's an ally or a threat. Inside his cabin, the light grows dim and orange from the dust already in the air. He checks the shutters, nails them down tight, and pulls his old rifle from behind the door. Not because he means to use it, but because storms have a way of drawing trouble. Loose cattle, blown debris, even desperate travelers looking for cover. He loads it, then leans it against the wall within reach. By midday, the horizon turns into a solid wall of brown, the kind that swallows sky and ground alike. The storm is moving fast. He curses under his breath and heads toward the barn to secure the doors before the roof tears loose. Halfway there, he sees movement, 2 figures fighting the wind, half running, half stumbling down the slope. For a second, he can't tell who they are through the flying grit. Then he sees the flash of woven cloth, the shape of a woman shielding another smaller one behind her. Elias doesn't hesitate. He runs straight into the wind, head down, coat pulled tight. The sand stings his face like hot needles. "This way," he shouts, voice barely audible. The taller woman, Naira, looks up, eyes narrowed against the dust, and recognizes him. She hesitates only a moment before pushing the younger one toward him. The girl can't be more than 16, coughing hard, clutching something close to her chest, a small wrapped bundle. He grabs her by the arm and pulls both women inside the half-collapsed barn just as the first blast of the storm hits full force. The door slams shut behind them, dust spilling through every crack. The sound is deafening, a constant roar that makes the walls tremble. Elias drops the latch and braces the door with a plank. Inside, visibility is poor. The air is thick with grit and the faint smell of old hay. The roof on the far side is half gone, sunlight bleeding through in jagged streaks. He can barely see the women's faces, just outlines against the dull glow. The younger one is coughing hard, eyes watering. Naira kneels beside her, one arm bleeding through a torn piece of deerskin. Elias crouches beside them, assessing without speaking. His mind runs through what to do first. The girl's breathing is shallow, but she's not injured. The bleeding arm, though, that needs attention. He moves to his tool chest, grabs a clean rag and a tin of boiled water he keeps for washing saddle wounds, and returns. When he reaches for her arm, Naira flinches, pulling back slightly, her eyes full of mistrust. Elias stops his hand halfway, steady, waiting. He doesn't speak. He just holds her gaze until she gives a small nod of permission. Then he works quickly, tearing the rag into strips, cleaning the wound. The gash is deep but clean, splintered with likely tore it open. She bites the inside of her cheek, but doesn't make a sound. "You should have stayed under cover," he mutters quietly, not out of anger, but concern. She answers without looking at him. "We had to move the child. The storm came faster than we thought." The girl lifts her bundle slightly. Elias notices it isn't food or clothing. It's a small bundle of herbs and carved tokens, wrapped in deerskin. Some kind of medicine or spiritual keepsake. He doesn't ask. He just nods once and focuses on the wound. When the dust thickens again, the barn darkens to a deep orange. The three of them sit in silence, the air dry and tense, the storm howling outside like the earth itself is tearing apart. Elias finishes wrapping Naira's arm and sets the tin aside. She studies him in the flickering light, her expression unreadable. "You were a soldier," she says quietly, her gaze drifting to the tattoo on his shoulder. He pauses, then nods. "Was. Not anymore." She holds his eyes. "You fought us." He doesn't answer right away. The question isn't really a question. "I did what they told me," he finally says. "Doesn't mean I believed in it." Her face tightens. Belief didn't stop bullets. Elias exhales through his nose, the weight of her words pressing harder than the storm outside. "No, it didn't." The silence that follows isn't comfortable, but it's honest. For the first time since the storm began, the noise outside seems to fade into the background. He looks at her bandaged arm, at the younger girl curled up beside her, asleep now despite the chaos. Something shifts in him. Pity, maybe, but deeper than that. Recognition. These aren't strangers or raiders. They're survivors of the same endless fight he's been trying to outlive in his own way. Hours pass before the storm begins to die down. When the wind finally breaks, the barn feels hollow and still. Dust lies thick on every surface, catching the dim evening light like ash. Elias opens the door slowly, careful not to startle them. The outside world looks scoured clean, fences half buried, sky pale again. "You can stay till morning," he says simply. "Storm's done, but the air's still bad." Naira studies him a long moment. "You trust us here?" Elias meets her gaze, tired but steady. "If I didn't, you'd still be out there." She gives the smallest nod, the first hint of understanding between them. As she settles beside the sleeping girl, Elias leans against the doorway, looking out at the flattened land. Something in him feels lighter, though he can't explain why. The world outside has changed shape, but for the first time in years, he doesn't feel entirely alone in it. By morning, the air is still and pale, carrying that quiet after-storm smell of dust and damp wood. The barn stands half buried under a thin film of sand, the roof holding just enough sunlight to filter in streaks across the floor. Elias Boone wakes first, stiff from sleeping upright against a post. His coat is draped over the younger girl, who's still asleep, her chest rising slow and even now. Naira sits near the doorway, awake, her expression calm but alert. Her bandaged arm rests against her knee. For a while, neither of them speaks. The silence isn't uncomfortable anymore, just full of things that don't need to be said yet. Elias pushes himself up, brushes sand from his hat, and studies the barn. 2 boards on the south wall are cracked. The roof needs patching before the next wind. He starts gathering what he can salvage from the wreck. Naira watches him work, her eyes sharp but softer than before. She still doesn't fully trust him, but something shifted last night when he tended her wound. In her world, men like him, white men, soldiers, ranchers, took without asking. But this one had done nothing but help and stay silent. That silence, strange as it was, gave her space to decide for herself who he was. Elias senses her watching. He doesn't look back, but says quietly, "There's a well behind the cabin. Cleaner water than this spring runoff. You and the girl can wash up there before you head back." Her voice comes steady calm. "You speak like a man who doesn't expect thanks." "I don't expect anything," he says, fitting a plank into place. "It keeps life simple." She stands, walking toward him, and studies the bandage on her arm. "You could have sent us away last night. Wouldn't have made sense," he says. "Storm would have buried you halfway down the ridge." He means it plainly, but she hears something else, an understanding she hadn't expected. She glances toward the girl, still asleep beside the old hay, and then lowers her voice. "Her name is Tala, my sister's daughter." He nods once. "She's strong." "She shouldn't have to be," Naira replies. There's bitterness there, quiet but heavy. Elias doesn't answer. He knows what it's like to want someone you care about to have an easier life, and to know that the land won't ever allow it. When the girl wakes, Elias brings them both coffee, weak, bitter, but warm. Naira accepts the tin cup after a pause. Tala watches curiously as steam rises from hers, unsure if it's safe. Elias gives her a small nod, and the girl sips. Her eyes brighten slightly. Outside, the morning sun burns through the haze, revealing a landscape changed by the storm. The topsoil is stripped clean, dunes have shifted. Elias surveys it with a quiet sigh. "Wind took half my south fence," he mutters. Naira follows his gaze. "The wind takes what it wants," she says. "Same as men." He looks at her for a long second, unsure if she means him or just the world in general. Maybe both. "I'll fix it before noon," he says finally. "You should head back before the heat rises." But Naira doesn't move right away. She hesitates near the door, as if measuring something in her mind. Then she says, "You fought before, against my people." It's not an accusation this time, just a fact laid out between them. Elias sets down the hammer. "I did. And you live alone now," she adds, glancing at the worn cabin in the distance. "You carry ghosts, same as we do." He lets out a slow breath. "Maybe that's why I don't shoot at shadows anymore." For the first time, she gives a faint, fleeting smile. Not warmth, just acknowledgement. A quiet sign that she understands what kind of man stands before her. By midday, the wind dies completely. Naira and Tala prepare to leave. Elias watches them gather their things, then steps into the barn to fetch a small burlap sack. He sets it down near her feet, cornmeal, dried beans, and a handful of kindling wrapped in canvas. "Take it," he says. "You'll need it more than I do." Her eyes harden slightly. "We don't beg." "Didn't say you did," he replies evenly. "It's a trade." "For what?" she asks, narrowing her eyes. He shrugs. "For leaving the barn cleaner than I found it." That earns him the smallest laugh, a brief, soft sound that surprises even her. She takes the sack, slinging it over her shoulder. "You're a strange man, Elias Boone." "I've heard worse," he says. When they walk toward the ridge, the sun burns high, cutting everything in sharp light. Elias watches until their shapes fade behind the rocks. He feels something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief, not regret, just quiet motion. Like the land itself had shifted under him. Later, when he returns to the barn, he finds something hanging from a nail by the door. A small strip of braided leather, tight and clean, threaded with a single turquoise bead. He holds it between his fingers for a moment, thumb tracing the pattern. A gesture of respect, maybe thanks, maybe both. That night, as dusk falls, Elias eats alone on the porch. The sky glows pale gold, and the sound of crickets returns to the air. He runs his hand over the leather braid, thinking of Naira's words, the girl's silence, and the way the storm had forced them together. For the first time in years, his thoughts don't circle back to war or guilt or the weight of what he's lost. They drift instead toward the ridge, toward the idea that maybe not everything left behind is meant to stay gone. A week passes under a wide, pale sky. The desert returns to silence, the kind that presses on a man's ears until even his own breathing sounds too loud. Elias Boone settles back into routine, repairing fences, oiling the hinges on the barn door, checking the spring before dusk, but things feel different now. He keeps catching himself glancing toward the ridge, half expecting to see movement. Most days, there's nothing. But some mornings, before the heat rolls in, he finds fresh tracks near the spring, light, deliberate steps, the kind that belong to people who know how to walk without being seen. He doesn't touch the tracks. He just studies them, memorizes the spacing, and lets them fade naturally. He knows they're Naira's people. He also knows they're being careful not to cross a line. The small leather braid she left behind still hangs from a nail above his porch beam, swaying gently whenever the wind shifts. It's the only sign of connection he's got out here, and for some reason, he leaves it right where it is. One morning, when he heads down to check the water flow, he finds something new beside the spring. A piece of carved bone, shaped like a river bend, tied with a thin strand of horsehair. It's smooth and polished, clearly made by hand. He crouches down, running his thumb over the edges, realizing it's another gift, or perhaps a message. He doesn't know what it means, but it feels deliberate. Maybe their way of saying they saw the sack of food he left last week on the ridge, and that they understood his intention. That same evening, he walks the ridge himself, taking a small burlap bag filled with grain and dried beans. He leaves it near a flat rock under a juniper tree where the sand is clear of tracks, a place easy to find but sheltered from the wind. He doesn't linger, just sets it down and walks away without looking back. The next day, it's gone. In its place, someone left a small bundle of herbs tied in deerskin and a round wooden token carved with sharp geometric lines. The carving is too clean to be random. He can't read its meaning, but the gesture carries a kind of quiet respect. He keeps the token on his mantle, beside a rusted spur and a worn Bible that hasn't been opened in years. Elias doesn't talk to anyone in town about the women on the ridge. When he rides into Silver Creek for supplies, he hears the usual chatter. Ranchers complaining about cattle rustlers, settlers whispering about Indians moving north again. He stays quiet, keeping his face unreadable. When one of the men, Harlan Tate, asks if he's seen any sign of squatters near his land, Elias simply says, "Nothing worth talking about." Tate grins in that knowing, arrogant way men do when they mistake decency for weakness. Elias lets it pass. That night, he lies awake listening to the wind scrape against the cabin walls. He thinks of Naira's eyes, steady, watchful, but not cruel. He wonders where her camp lies, how many people she's responsible for, and what it must take to keep them alive in a land this unforgiving. He remembers the younger girl, Tala, and the way she'd clutched that small bundle like something sacred. He wonders if she's eating, if the wound on Naira's arm healed properly. He tells himself it's just curiosity, but it doesn't feel like that anymore. A few days later, while mending a corral gate, Elias spots something on the horizon, movement near the far fence line. His instinct kicks in. He reaches for the rifle leaning against the post. Through the heat shimmer, he sees 3 riders approaching from the south. Settlers, not Apaches. They're armed, moving slow but confident. He waits until they're within calling distance. The lead rider, Tate again, raises a hand in mock greeting. "Afternoon, Boone. Heard you've got company up here," he calls out. His tone is casual, but his eyes aren't. "Some folks say a band of raiders has been drinking from your spring." That true. Elias wipes sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Ain't seen raiders. Just dust and cattle. Tate smirks. You sure? Word is, a few of 'em been spotted along the ridge. Women mostly. You tell us if they were using your land, wouldn't you? Elias stares at him, the silence stretching long enough to make the other men shift in their saddles. Finally, he says, I'd tell you if there was trouble. There isn't. Tate's eyes narrow slightly, testing. You always were soft-hearted, Boone. Careful that doesn't get you killed out here. Elias doesn't rise to it. I'll take my chances. The men linger a moment longer, then ride off, the dust of their horses hanging in the air long after they're gone. Elias stands still until the sound fades, jaw tight. He knows Tate won't let it go. Word travels fast in these parts, and talk of Apache women hiding in the hills can bring a mob faster than common sense. That evening, he takes precautions. He moves the feed sacks into the barn, checks his ammunition, and keeps the lantern low. The ridge is quiet again, but the silence feels sharper, more watchful. When he steps out to the porch before turning in, he sees it, a flicker of movement by the juniper line, the faint glow of a small fire. Too small to be reckless, too deliberate to be random. Naira's people, keeping their distance but still close enough to watch. He stands there for a while, the turquoise bead on the leather braid catching faint moonlight beside his door. For the first time in years, Elias feels the strange certainty that his choices matter. Not to anyone in town, not to the ghosts of the war, but to the living people trying to survive just beyond his fence. He knows trouble's coming. Tate will be back, and not alone. But as he watches that small flicker of fire on the ridge, he also knows one thing with absolute clarity. If the time comes, he won't stand against them. Not this time. The land had taken enough from both sides. Now, finally, he'd decide what kind of man he wanted to be on it. The following morning carries a sharp, uneasy stillness. The sky above the ridge glows pale blue, the air heavy with that strange calm that comes before heat or trouble. Elias Boone steps out onto his porch with a tin of coffee in hand, scanning the horizon. He doesn't see smoke or riders, but he feels watched. That sixth sense he learned in the cavalry, when to move, when to wait, when to expect the worst, hasn't failed him yet. He sets the cup down and tightens the leather strap around his revolver. The small turquoise braid still sways gently from the porch beam, brushing against his shoulder in the wind. It reminds him of who left it there and what line he's crossed without meaning to. By offering help, by staying silent, he's made himself a part of something he can't easily undo. Around noon, he's working the corral when the sound of horses cuts through the dry air. Not one or two, 6, maybe more. Elias straightens, wiping the sweat from his brow, and sees a line of riders approaching fast from the south. Dust rises behind them like smoke. He knows that gait before he can see the faces. Harlan Tate, leading again. When the men reach the gate, Tate doesn't dismount. He rides up close, eyes cold under the brim of his hat. Heard the stories again, Boone, he says. Your place is feeding outlaws. Apache women. Settlers seen smoke up near the ridge last night. You gonna tell me you don't know about that? Elias doesn't flinch. I know the ridge, he says calmly, and I know what a lie sounds like. One of the younger riders spits to the side. If there's a camp up there, we'll find it. You won't, Elias replies. There's nothing to find but rock and wind. Tate leans in on his saddle horn. You protecting them, Boone? That what this is? Elias stares back, silent for a moment too long. The pause alone is enough to feed Tate's suspicion. You think you can play savior out here? You'll end up with your throat slit, Tate says. I've seen what those people do. Elias's voice stays even. You've seen what men like you made them do. The words hang heavy in the heat. Tate's jaw tightens. His horse stamps the dirt. For a moment, the situation feels seconds away from violence. Then another sound breaks through, the clatter of hooves from behind the men. A rider in a worn deputy's coat pulls up, raising a hand. It's Deputy Rhodes, one of the few men in Silver Creek who still bothers to think before pulling a trigger. He looks between them. What's this about? Tate turns his horse. Same thing it's always about. Indians too close to town. Boone hears feeding them. Rhodes studies Elias. That true. Elias shakes his head slowly. No raiders here. No fights. Just water and land that won't grow much anymore. Rhodes exhales through his nose. Then there's no reason to stir it up. Sheriff won't back a shooting on Boone's land unless someone fires first. Tate looks ready to argue, but he reads the deputy's tone and reins in. You always did stick up for him, he says. Guess that makes both of you fools. Elias's expression doesn't change. Maybe, he says quietly, but I can sleep at night. Tate spits, turns his horse, and signals the others. We'll be watching this ridge, he says. If I see smoke again, I'll come back, and I won't bring a deputy. The men ride off, their silhouettes shrinking into the glare. When they're gone, Rhodes dismounts, dusting his coat. You really sure there's nothing up there? He asks. Elias doesn't lie, but he doesn't tell the whole truth either. Just the ghosts, Rhodes, he says. They don't bother anyone. The deputy studies him for a beat, then nods. You're a decent man, Boone. Try not to make it get you killed. After Rhodes leaves, Elias stands by the gate for a long while, watching the trail disappear in a heat haze. His heartbeat hasn't slowed yet. Tate won't let this rest. And if the settlers catch sight of Naira's people, there'll be no talking them down. By sundown, Elias walks the ridge again. The desert air cools fast after dark, carrying the faint crackle of a fire somewhere north. He follows it cautiously until he sees the glow between rocks. Naira is there, kneeling beside the flames, her face lit by the flicker. Two other women sit behind her, mending clothing, while Tala sleeps against a saddle blanket. Elias steps into view, slowly, hands open, voice low. You need to move, he says. Naira looks up instantly, alert but not startled. We have children and old ones, she says. They can't walk far tonight. He shakes his head. Tate's men will come back. With more rifles. You stay here, they'll find you. For a moment, the tension in her eyes turns to frustration. And where do you think we should go? Every piece of this land belongs to someone else. I know, he says quietly, but I know places they don't. There's a dry wash east of here, behind the Black Rocks. I rode there once during the war. Water runs shallow, but it's safe hidden. Naira studies him. Why do you care what happens to us? Elias hesitates, searching for the truth that fits. Because once I didn't, and I'm still paying for that. She doesn't answer right away, but something in her face softens. She nods once. We'll move when it's dark. He leaves them with one of his canteens, setting it near the fire without words. Before turning back toward his ranch, he adds, take the ridge trail behind the junipers. It's quiet, even in moonlight. I'll ride out at dawn and cover your tracks. When he returns to his cabin, the turquoise braid sways again in the wind. He watches it for a long moment, feeling the tension in his chest ease. Not because the danger has passed, but because, for the first time, he knows what side he's on. The next morning, he finds their camp empty. The ashes are buried, the prints brushed away. Only a new sign remains, hanging from the same juniper where he left the grain weeks ago. It's another gift, a small carved charm in the shape of a hawk, wings spread. A mark of trust. Elias closes his hand around it, the air cool against his skin. He knows Tate will come again, but now, at least, the land feels less hollow. The fence, the spring, the quiet mornings, they all mean something again. Something shared, something worth defending. The dawn after their departure breaks cold and unnaturally quiet. The ridge looks stripped bare again. No smoke, no footprints, no trace of where the Apache women had camped. Elias Boone walks the perimeter of his ranch slowly, scanning the horizon out of habit. The emptiness unsettles him more than he expected. For weeks, he had gotten used to their silent presence. The distant glow of a fire, the occasional echo of laughter carried by the wind. Now, without it, the land feels too still, like a body holding its breath. He crouches by the spring, filling his canteen, and notices something hanging from a low branch, a strip of white cloth tied carefully in a knot. It's a signal, one he recognizes from his scout days. We moved. We're alive. He unties it and folds it into his pocket. For the rest of the morning, he works his land with mechanical precision, patching fences, feeding the remaining cattle, sharpening tools. Yet, even in silence, he can't shake the thought of what could happen next. Harlan Tate wasn't the kind of man to forget defiance. Word would have reached him by now that the women were gone. But men like Tate didn't stop with absence. They needed control, victory, the satisfaction of seeing something punished. By late afternoon, Elias saddles his horse and rides into Silver Creek for supplies. The town feels smaller every time he visits. Dust drifts through the empty street. The blacksmith's hammer echoes like gunfire in the still air. When he enters the general store, heads turn. Two men at the counter go quiet mid-conversation. He ignores them and picks up a sack of flour, salt, and some cartridges. The storekeeper, a wiry man named Hollis, clears his throat. Heard there was trouble up your way, Boone. Tate's been talking again. Says you're hiding him. Elias's voice stays level. Tate's mouth runs faster than his brain. Hollis leans in a little. Careful all the same. Folks around here don't like the idea of you protecting Apaches. Not after what happened in Dry Creek last spring. Elias looks up from his list, his tone dry. I wasn't the one who started that fire. Hollis shrugs uneasily and slides the goods across the counter. Just saying, men get nervous easy when the land's dry and the herds are dying. They start looking for someone to blame. Elias nods once and leaves without another word. As he rides out of town, he notices Tate's horse tied outside the saloon. Tate himself leans in the doorway, watching. The man's eyes follow him until he's out of sight, and Elias knows that look, it's not curiosity, it's the cold patience of someone waiting for his chance. Back at the ranch, dusk settles fast. Elias works by lantern light, nailing down a new board on the barn wall. He stops when he hears a distant sound. Hoofbeats, faint but deliberate. He steps out quietly, hand near his revolver. The sound fades toward the ridge. Not Tate this time. The rhythm is lighter, measured. He mounts his horse and follows the trail through the dark until the moonlight catches something near the juniper grove, a small fire hidden in the rocks. Naira stands beside it, her face half lit, the wind pushing her hair across her cheek. When she sees him, she doesn't reach for her knife. She just nods once, as if she'd been expecting him. You shouldn't be this close to the ranch, he says quietly. We moved north, she answers, near the black rocks you spoke of. But the weather's weak. We'll need to find another soon. He studies her for a long moment, her voice low but steady. There's exhaustion in her face, but also resolve. Tate's not done, he says. He's stirring talk in town. They'll come looking again. I know, she replies. That's why I came. She reaches into her pouch and hands him a small folded scrap of paper. It's a rough map, hand-drawn, showing a Dry Creek bed twisting north into the foothills. This is where we'll go next if the men come. There's a spring near the rock ledge. My people used it long ago. He unfolds it carefully, memorizing the markings. You trust me with this? Naira meets his eyes. You earned it. The words catch him off guard. For a moment, neither speaks. The fire cracks softly between them. He notices her arm is healing, his stitches held. She must have changed the bandage herself with care. You have what you need to get there? He asks. Enough for now, she says, glancing toward the faint outline of the ridge. We'll take what we can carry. She hesitates, then adds, the others still think you'll turn us in. And you? He asks. She pauses, the corner of her mouth tightening. I think you're tired of doing what other men expect of you. Elias lets out a quiet breath that's almost a laugh. You're not wrong. Before she leaves, Naira steps closer to him, her expression shifting, no warmth, but something honest. If Tate comes, she says, don't stand alone. He won't come to talk. I never do, he replies, meaning it both ways. When she disappears into the darkness, Elias stays by the fire a while longer. He studies the map again, the rough hand-drawn lines guiding him to a place that's still nameless to him, but filled with meaning to her. Then he folds it and tucks into his coat. Back at the ranch, the night is deep and still. He puts out his lantern, listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods. In the dark, the turquoise braid on the porch glints faintly in the moonlight, a symbol, a warning, maybe both. He lies awake for hours, thinking of what Naira said. She's right. He's tired of watching the world break the same way over and overwhelm men like Tate Colorado. If they come again, and he knows they will, he's done staying quiet. For the first time in years, his decisions won't be about survival. They'll be about what's right, and that, he realizes, might finally make him whole again. The sun rose hard and white over the hills the next morning, baking the desert before the day had even begun. The air was so dry that every movement kicked up dust, every breath tasted of metal. Elias Boone saddled his horse in silence, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't have to see Tate's riders to know they were coming. He could feel it, the quiet before violence, the stillness that always settled over the land when men were about to do something they couldn't take back. He checked his rifle, made sure it was clean, then leaned it against the porch beam beside the turquoise braid. That small piece of color hanging there had come to mean more than he could admit. It wasn't just a token, it was a promise. A reminder that he wasn't alone in this anymore. Not really. By mid-morning, he saw them. A dark smudge moving across the southern plain, growing clearer with every minute. 6 men, same as before, with Tate at the front. Their rifles hung low in their saddles. They weren't here to talk. Elias felt his pulse slow. Old instincts kicking in, the part of him that remembered how to think when everything was about to go wrong. He didn't run for the rifle. Instead, he stepped off the porch, standing in plain view. He wanted them to see he wasn't hiding. When Tate stopped 20 yards out, dust rising around the hooves of his horse, Elias didn't move. "Told you I'd come back," Tate said, his grin sharp and thin. "You got one last chance to tell me where they went." Elias's voice stayed even. "They're gone. You won't find them." Tate spat into the dirt. "You think that makes it better? You think helping him escape makes you a hero?" "No," Elias said quietly. "Just makes me a man who can still look in the mirror." That simple answer landed heavier than any insult. The men behind Tate shifted, uncertain. Some of them didn't look like they wanted to fight. Not really. But Tate couldn't back down now. He raised his rifle. Elias didn't flinch. "If you fire that," he said, "you'll start something you can't stop. You'll draw blood for nothing, and you'll answer for it when the law rides through here." "There ain't no law that matters out here," Tate hissed. Behind him, the sound of distant hoofbeats broke through the heat. Tate froze. Everyone turned. From the north, a lone rider was approaching fast, Deputy Rhodes. His horse kicked up dust as he pulled in hard between them, rifle already unshouldered. "That's far enough," Rhodes barked. "Put the guns down." Tate laughed coldly. "You taking his side again?" "I'm taking the side that keeps this county from turning into a graveyard," Rhodes said. "Sheriff heard what you were planning, Tate. He's ordered you off Boone's land. You fire here, and you're done." Tate's grin faltered. He wasn't brave enough to shoot a lawman, not with witnesses. After a long, bitter silence, he spat again and turned his horse. "You'll regret this, Boone. You and your pet savages both." Then he rode off, his men following, muttering under their breath. When they were gone, the silence fell like a heavy blanket. Rhodes dismounted and wiped his brow. "They'll talk," he said, "but they won't be back." The sheriff made sure of that. Elias nodded once. "That's good enough for me." "You did the right thing," Rhodes said. Elias gave a small, tired smile. "Doesn't always feel like it." The deputy mounted up again. "It will," he said, then rode off toward town, leaving Elias alone in the quiet heat. He stood there a long time, watching the dust settle. When the last sound faded, he turned toward the ridge. The land looked open again, free in a way it hadn't been for years. No more smoke from the Apache camp, no more fear of riders coming over the hill, just stillness and space. That evening, he took his horse and followed the dry wash north, to where the black rocks rose out of the earth like broken teeth. He wanted to see for himself if Naira's people had made it. The trail was faint, but he found signs: ashes from an old fire, a few stone markers, footprints pressed deep into the dirt, all of them leading toward higher ground. When he reached the edge of the canyon, he saw it, a narrow spring trickling between the rocks, glinting in the sun. Nearby, a line of smoke rose thin and clean from a new camp. They'd made it. Safe, at least for now. He didn't ride closer. He just sat there, watching. After a moment, a small figure appeared at the edge of the rocks. Tala, the young girl. She spotted him, froze, then ran back toward the camp. A minute later, Naira stepped out, standing tall in the sunlight. She didn't wave, but she didn't hide either. They looked at each other across the canyon. No words, no need. Just a nod, quiet and certain. Elias turned his horse and rode back toward the ranch as the light began to fade. The desert glowed orange and gold, the air cooling with the promise of night. When he reached home, he hung his hat on the porch beam and sat on the step, listening to the crickets and the soft trickle of a spring. He looked up at the turquoise braid swaying gently above him. It caught the last bit of sunset and shimmered just slightly. He smiled faintly, not out of joy exactly, but out of peace, the kind that comes when a man finally lays his ghost to rest. He had spent years trying to rebuild what the world took from him: land, pride, the quiet inside his own head. Now he realized he hadn't been rebuilding for himself at all. He'd been holding ground for something better, for someone else to survive here when he was gone. The wind eased, and for the first time in a long while, the sound of running water didn't remind him of loss. It reminded him of life. Elias Boone leaned back against the wall of his cabin, the turquoise charm above his head, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the land would be the same, dry, wide, and merciless, but would no longer feel empty. And for a man like him, that was enough. The story of his war, his guilt, and his loneliness had finally come to an end. Not with blood, not with vengeance, but with something far quieter, far rarer. A simple, honest peace.